In a world that feels like it's getting more and more chaotic, the old rules of leadership just aren't cutting it anymore. So what we're going to unpack here is a powerful new framework. It was developed in the high-pressure world of modern manufacturing, but honestly, it's relevant for any leader who's trying to navigate this constant disruption. It's all based on a really fascinating university research project that challenges a lot of what we thought we knew about leading in a crisis.
Let's just start with the question that gets right to the heart of this research. What if, when things get really chaotic, our instincts as leaders are not just a little bit off? What if they're actively making things worse? It's a provocative idea for sure, and it forces us to rethink everything we do when the ground is constantly shifting beneath our feet.
You can think of this research as a whole new leadership playbook. It really digs into why the traditional approaches, especially in these post-COVID manufacturing environments, are no longer just outdated. They're actually becoming a liability.
And this quote pretty much nails the core problem. Our leadership models were built for the industrial age. Assembly lines, predictability, top-down control. But we're trying to use that 20th century blueprint to build a 21st century knowledge-driven organization. The parts just don't fit anymore. It's like trying to run a smartphone with a steam engine's operating manual.
To really get why those old models are failing so badly, we have to understand just how fundamentally our entire environment has changed. It's not just a little more difficult these days, we're talking about a whole different category of difficult.
For decades, leaders have used the acronym VUCA to try and make sense of disruption. You've probably heard it: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it was a pretty useful map for a complicated world. But here's the thing: the map no longer reflects the territory. We've moved way beyond complicated.
The new reality is much better described by this acronym, BANI. It paints a picture of a world that is first brittle, where systems we rely on can shatter without any warning. It's anxious, creating this constant underlying sense of unease. It's nonlinear, where a tiny action can have massive, completely unpredictable consequences. And finally, it's incomprehensible, where events happen that seem to defy all logic. In short, it's a world that doesn't play by the old rules.
So just think about what this shift to a BANI world actually means for a leader on a Tuesday morning. We're now dealing with systems that could catastrophically fail overnight, and we're facing problems that seem to actively resist any attempt to analyze them. The old simple rules of if this, then that just don't apply anymore.
So what happens when leaders are suddenly confronted with this BANI world? Well, it tends to trigger a really dangerous psychological trap that we absolutely have to understand.
It's called the Threat-Rigidity trap. There's decades of research on this, and it shows that when we as people and our organizations feel threatened, our gut instinct is to clamp down. We double down on what we already know, we tighten control, we restrict the flow of information, and we pretty much slam the brakes on any kind of creativity. It's a purely defensive crouch.
And this is where it gets really dangerous because it creates this vicious feedback loop. Look at how this works. First, a threat pops up. Our gut instinct is to constrict control. This makes our response rigid. We only do what we think is safe. But in a chaotic world, that rigid response almost always fails, which only makes the initial threat even bigger. And just like that, we're trapped in a downward spiral of our own making.
So the most crucial point is this: our default instinct to command and control during a crisis, the very thing that feels the safest, is the exact opposite of what's needed to navigate a truly chaotic BANI world. Relying on those old rigid responses is, quite literally, a recipe for failure.
Okay, so if that command and control instinct is the trap, how in the world do we escape it? Well, the research proposes a powerful and much more adaptive solution. The solution isn't just one thing. It's an integration of three really powerful ideas into a single framework. First, it pulls from adaptive leadership, which gives us the tools to navigate that constant volatility. Then, it uses complexity leadership, which is all about building creative, emergent systems instead of rigid hierarchies. And it's all grounded in systems thinking, the ability to see the entire interconnected web, not just the individual threads.
And this quote right here just brilliantly illustrates that fundamental change in mindset. Leadership is no longer about one person at the top having all the answers. It's about creating the conditions for the entire organization to solve problems together, like an intelligent, adaptive network.
Maybe the best way to think about this is a shift in metaphor. We need to move from seeing the leader as a machine operator, pulling levers, enforcing rigid processes, to seeing the leader as a gardener. A gardener doesn't force a plant to grow. They cultivate the entire ecosystem, the soil, the water, the sunlight, so that the whole system can thrive and adapt on its own.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds great in theory, right? But it's so important to know that this framework wasn't just developed in an ivory tower. It was built in the trenches of high-pressure industrial environments over several years.
And this framework wasn't built overnight. You can see the 4-year evolution right here. It started with the foundational work in year 1, empowering teams from the ground up. Year 2 was all about developing emotional intelligence and strategic influence. Then, in year 3, those skills were really put to the test in a real crisis, which is what forged that resilience. And all of this culminates in year 4, with a new, fully integrated leadership identity that is designed to navigate complexity.
So what's the payoff for making this pretty difficult shift? Well, the research points to 3 critical improvements that build real, lasting organizational strength. First, and this is a big one, is a dramatic improvement in operational performance. When you lead like a gardener, you create much better alignment between the high-level strategy and the actual work being done on the ground. That closes the gap, it reduces waste, and it just enhances delivery across the board. Second, it leads to smarter, faster decision-making right when it matters most. By letting go of that need for rigid control and really embracing systems thinking, leaders can see the bigger picture. They can make calls that improve the stability of the entire organization, not just one siloed department.
And third, and you could say this is the ultimate goal, it builds genuine organizational resilience. We're not just talking about bouncing back from one crisis. This is about creating a scalable leadership culture that allows the organization to thrive, to adapt, and to grow stronger because of sustained uncertainty, not in spite of it. This quote just perfectly captures the new mindset we need. The future of leadership isn't about pretending to be certain in a world that is going to remain uncertain. It's about creating clarity, clarity of purpose, clarity of direction, despite all the chaos. So, we'll leave you with a question to reflect on in your own work. In a world that increasingly defies logic, which role are you playing? Are you still trying to operate the machine, pulling the same old levers, or are you ready to start cultivating the garden?